Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. I never imagined damnation could wear the guise of threadbare carpet and water-stained ceilings. Yet, huddled within the echoing confines of a motel bathroom, the metallic rasp of a lockpick scraping against the cheap mechanism outside told a different story. Hell, it turned out, wasn't fire and brimstone, but the chilling realization that the most ravenous wolves often wore the widest, emptiest smiles. My name is Elias Thorne, a peddler of wares across state lines, a traveling man. It's a label ripe for caricature, I know, but it's the rhythm of my days. Asphalt ribbons unfurling, towns blurring past, and nights swallowed by establishments like this one. You develop a certain resilience, a callus over the soul, or so I'd convinced myself. It was a Tuesday, bleeding into Wednesday, late October's chill already sharp in the air, when the skeletal neon of the Crimson Sparrow Inn sputtered into view. Half the sign was dead, a broken promise against the bruised twilight sky, but the price was right, and exhaustion gnawed deeper than my standards. Behind the reception desk stood a man seemingly fused to the faux wood counter, a relic from the motel's probable genesis decades prior. He possessed an aggressive sort of affability, the kind that sets your teeth on edge. His questions too numerous, too pointed as he processed my arrival. "And what winds blow you to our humble corner of the world, Mr. Thorne?" he inquired, a smile stretched thin, never quite illuminating the depths of his eyes. "Just passing through," I offered, aiming for brevity. "Business calls in the next county." He nodded with an unsettling eagerness. "Ah, yes, of course. We see a fair few salesmen. Always journeying, eh? Must get solitary out there on the road." A hollow laugh escaped me, my only desire to reach my room, to shed his invasive gaze. Indeed, it has its lonely stretches. Comes with the territory. He slid a heavy, tarnished metal key across the counter. No plastic card here. "Well, you settle in now. Anything you require, anything at all, you just let old Silas know." Silas Croft. The name felt as worn as the key. Gratitude murmured. I retreated towards my designated room, the man's intrusive attention clinging like damp air. The room itself was a predictable tableau of transient despair, the scent of stale cigarettes and regret, wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin, a television set that belonged in a museum of technological failures. Yet the bed linens appeared passably clean, and fatigue eclipsed all other concerns. My travel case hit the floor. My shoes remained on as I collapsed onto the mattress. Sleep must have claimed me swiftly, for the next conscious sensation was a sharp rapping against the door, jolting me from a shallow dreg of rest. Disoriented, thick-headed, I lurched upright and navigated the small space. Silas Croft stood framed in the doorway, that unnervingly broad smile firmly in place. "Terribly sorry to disturb you, Mr. Thorne," he purred, his tone devoid of genuine apology. Just doing my rounds. Couldn't help but notice your vehicle seems to have acquired a flat tire. My mind struggled to catch up, confusion warring with a sudden spike of alarm. A flat? But I just parked less than an hour ago. How could... Ah, these things happen, he interrupted, smooth as oil slick. Tell you what, come have a look-see. I'm quite adept with automobiles. Perhaps I can lend a hand. Every primal instinct shrieked a warning, a klaxon blaring in the fog of my weariness. But the practical fear of being stranded come morning, coupled with my lingering stupor, nudged me towards acquiescence. All right, I mumbled, grabbing my coat. Show me. We stepped out into the biting night air. As we neared my sedan, parked under the jaundiced glow of a lone security light, a discrepancy registered. All 4 tires stood firm, properly inflated. I turned toward Silas, a question forming on my lips, just as I caught the cold glint of something metallic clutched in his fist. Before comprehension could fully dawn, a brutal impact exploded against the side of my skull. The world tilted, dissolved into fractured light, and then plunged into utter blackness. Consciousness returned sluggishly, heralded by a sledgehammer pounding inside my head. As shapes swam back into focus, the grim reality materialized. I was back in the motel room, lashed tightly to a wooden chair. Silas Croft stood before me, his practiced smile now warped into something predatory and undisguised. "Well, now," he chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Look who decided to rejoin the waking world. You know, Mr. Thorne, you salesmen are cut from the same cloth, so trusting, so terribly easy to coax." A knot of pure terror tightened in my throat. What? What is it you want? Silas's eyes held a disturbing confluence of avarice and unhinged glee. "Oh, it's hardly about my wants. It's about your possessions. Salesmen, you see, always travel with a bit of cash, don't they? Always something potentially valuable tucked away in those smart briefcases." He gestured towards my luggage, already rummaging through it with an unnervingly familiar dexterity. "But it's more than just the valuables," he continued, his tone almost conversational, lecturing. "You're also ideal subjects, constantly moving, no fixed address. Nobody raises an alarm for days, sometimes weeks." Ice water seemed to flood my veins as the full horror of his words sank in. How many others had checked into the Crimson Sparrow Inn and never checked out? How many journeys had ended abruptly within these 4 stained walls? While Silas sifted through my belongings, I strained against my restraints. The ropes bit deep, but the knot securing my right wrist seemed to possess a fraction of give. If only I could work it. "Wouldn't waste your energy," Silas commented idly without looking up. "Been doing this long enough to master a proper binding." Panic surged, threatening to drown me, but I fought it back, clawing for clarity. "Look," I began, striving for a steady voice. "You don't need to do this. Take the money, take whatever you want. I won't say a word to anyone. Just let me leave." Silas turned, shaking his head with theatrical pity. "Tut, tut, you know that's not feasible. Can't have you scurrying off to the authorities now, can we? No, Mr. Thorne, I'm afraid your travels conclude here." From his pocket, he produced a menacing knife, its blade catching the weak lamplight with a hungry shimmer. "Don't fret, though. I'll make it swift. I'm not entirely without mercy." As he advanced, the knife held ready, something primal ignited within me. Fueled by sheer desperation, I hurled my weight backwards, chair and all. The crash jarred every bone, sending agony shooting through me, but the impact jolted the ropes. Silas lunged, but I twisted away, my right hand suddenly, miraculously free. My fingers scrambled, closing around the base of the heavy bedside lamp. With every ounce of remaining strength, I swung. The lamp connected with Silas's skull with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor without a sound. For a disbelieving moment, I lay there, sucking in ragged breaths, stunned by the sudden turn. Then, adrenaline surged. Moving with clumsy haste, hampered by the remaining ropes, I struggled to free myself completely. Once untangled, I wasted no precious seconds. Snatching my wallet and car keys, I abandoned everything else. As my hand closed around the doorknob, a low groan emanated from the floor behind me. Silas was stirring. I flung the door open and bolted into the night, sprinting towards my car, fingers fumbling frantically with the key. Behind me, Silas's enraged shouts echoed, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps on asphalt. I threw myself behind the wheel, jammed the key home, and roared out of the parking lot, tires spitting gravel. A final glance in the rearview mirror seared his image into my mind. Silas Croft, standing solitary in the middle of the access road, his face a contorted mask of fury under the dying neon. I drove for what felt like an eternity, hands trembling violently on the steering wheel, eyes constantly scanning the mirror, expecting the imminent glare of pursuing headlights. Only when the first tentative fingers of dawn began to paint the eastern sky did a sliver of the tension ease. I pulled into the bright, anonymous bustle of a large truck stop, my thoughts a chaotic storm. The police. I had to call them. Yet a chilling paranoia held me captive. What if Croft wasn't acting alone? What if local authorities were compromised? What if this web was wider, darker than I could comprehend? Ultimately, fear propelled me onward. I crossed one state line, then another, stopping only for fuel, driven by a primal need for distance. It wasn't until I was 3 states removed from the Crimson Sparrow Inn that I finally mustered the courage to walk into a police station. The detective who took my report listened intently, his expression hardening into grim understanding. "You're not the first soul to tell a tale like this," he stated gravely when I had finished recounting the ordeal. "We've heard whispers, similar accounts from other travelers waylaid along that route. But you're the first one who got away clean, the first who can put a face and a name to the monster." The ensuing weeks were a blur of cooperation with law enforcement, piecing together the evidence against Silas Croft and the sinister operation hidden behind the facade of the Crimson Sparrow Inn. My instincts had been tragically accurate. Croft was merely a component in a predatory machine that had been ensnaring unsuspecting travelers for years. When the news of the arrests finally came, a profound weight seemed to lift, yet the relief felt strangely hollow, incomplete. The experience had irrevocably altered the landscape of my mind. Returning to the road, to the life of a traveling salesman, was unthinkable. the mere thought of anonymous motel rooms, the endless stretches of highway, conjured a visceral dread I couldn't suppress. I found employment closer to home, a local sales route that allowed the nightly solace of my own bed, my own locked doors. Yet, sleep doesn't always come easy. In the quiet hours, the memory surfaces. The musty room, the glint of the knife, the chill and ease with which Silas spoke of ending lives. I think of how narrowly I escaped becoming another statistic, another face on a missing person flyer. I think of those who weren't so fortunate, whose stories concluded in that squalid inn. And I understand with chilling certainty that the world teems with Silas Crofts, predators masked by helpful smiles and solicitous inquiries. This knowledge is a heavy burden, yet it has honed my senses, sharpened my caution. Now, every check-in counter, every casual encounter with a stranger is filtered through a lens of vigilance. Some might label it paranoia. I know it as survival, because the deadliest threats rarely announce themselves with snarls and bared teeth. Often, they arrive softly, offering assistance, luring you in with a disarming smile and a seemingly innocent query. How can I help you today? My night at the Crimson Sparrow Inn taught me the fragility of trust, the immense value of intuition. It underscored that sometimes the most critical transaction isn't closing a deal, but recognizing when you're the one being sold a lethal deception. I survived, yes, but the true ongoing challenge lies in navigating a world where I now see the potential abyss lurking just behind the friendliest facade. It's a lesson etched deep, a cautionary tale I pray others absorb without enduring the tuition I paid. In this uncertain landscape, a measure of suspicion isn't cynicism, it's essential armor. A fool's errand descending those stairs. Hindsight screams it, doesn't it? Always too late. But the truth remains. I never should have sought the source of that music in the belly of Blackwood Sanatorium, where unseen feet dogged our steps, where I learned some ruins deserved their silence. It began 3 days prior. Myself, Kaylin, and Reese indulging our shared obsession with derelict spaces. We'd plumbed the depths of most abandoned shells in our slice of Philadelphia, yet Blackwood Sanatorium held a unique gravity. Shuttered 15 years now, swallowed by whispers of scandal, patient subjugation, unsanctioned trials, the standard grimoire of institutional horrors. Asbestos warnings kept most sensible folk away, but equipped with respirators and resolve, we fancied ourselves beyond amateurish fears. The late October wind, sharp as shattered glass, worried the chain-link perimeter as our car crunched onto the weed-choked tarmac around 2 in the afternoon. Ideal conditions, sufficient daylight for exploration, encroaching dusk for atmospheric photography. The complex sprawled across 5 acres, its crimson brickwork weeping decades of soot, window voids like vacant eyes fringed with shattered panes. Main entrance is a no-go, too visible, Reese observed, cinching his pack straps. Loading bay, rear access, I countered, recalling the blueprints I'd unearthed online. Through the defunct kitchens. Kaylin, ever impatient, was already advancing, his camera bumping rhythmically against his jacket. Less discourse, more discovery. I need those morgue shots before the light fails. We navigated thickets of brittle weeds and drifts of unidentifiable refuse. The loading dock door sagged, wrenched from its moorings. A concerted shove granted us entry. Flashlight beams sliced through the particulate haze. Within, the kitchen was a tableau of corrosion and collapse. Oxidized steel hulks dangling ceiling panels. Our boots ground shards and grit underfoot. Somewhere deeper in the gloom, water dripped, a metronomic plink, plink, plink reverberating against grimy tile. "Look here," Kalen murmured, his light playing over a wall. Stark red letters, nearly a meter high, shrieked, "The voices never left." "Charming," Reese scoffed. "Likely those delinquents who tripped the alarm last month." We pushed further into the structure's decaying heart, Kalen methodically capturing the entropic beauty. This was our ritual, preserving these forgotten places in digital amber before the wrecking ball arrived. The third floor offered glimpses into patient confines, bed frames bolted fast, leather restraints hanging like shed skins. Administrative sprawl dominated the fourth. Mountains of mildewed documents, fossilized computers, wire hangers screeching on denuded racks. It was upon returning to the ground floor that the sound reached me, a delicate, almost subliminal piano melody wafting up from below. A few scattered notes, silence, then another hesitant phrase. "Do you hear that?" I halted, raising a hand. "Hear what?" Kalen remained absorbed in his viewfinder, framing an overturned gurney. "Piano, from the basement." Reese chuckled uneasily. "Sure, phantom recital by some spectral orderly. I'm serious." The notes returned, clearer now, a simple, faltering tune. "Listen." They paused, heads tilted. The melody persisted for perhaps 5 seconds, then dissolved. "Just the building settling," Reese offered. "Old structures groan, wind howls through cavities." "Wind doesn't practice arpeggios," I insisted. "Someone's down there." "Squatter with a Casio, perhaps," Kalen proposed. "Let's hit the morgue and extract ourselves. Sun's dipping." Yet the music snagged at my curiosity, too distinct, too deliberate. "I'm taking a look. Wait here if you want." "Absolutely not," Reese sighed, resigned. "Splitting up? Classic blunder. Besides, the lower levels are probably inundated." Behind a ponderous fire door, we located the stairwell. Concrete steps plunged into absolute black, the air growing thick, viscous with the scent of mold and stagnant water. Our lights revealed walls slick with black fungal blooms. Water glistened darkly on the treads. The music intensified here, still fragmented, yet undeniably present. A childlike melody, like a damaged music box, unwinding. "This feels profoundly unwise," Kalen muttered, yet he descended behind me. With each downward step, the temperature plummeted. Reaching the landing, my breath plumed visibly. The basement unfolded into Stygian darkness, a labyrinth of corridors and storage vaults. The music echoed, refracted by concrete and damp, seeming to originate from everywhere and nowhere. It was then I registered the footsteps. Initially dismissed as our own reverberations, their cadence felt subtly wrong. For every step we took, an additional footfall sounded, slightly asynchronous, a ghostly syncopation. When we froze, the phantom steps persisted for a heartbeat longer before ceasing. "Did you hear?" I whispered. "Echoes," Reese insisted, though a tremor roughened his voice. "Acoustics play tricks underground." We pressed deeper. The music waxed and waned, a teasing auditory phantom, never quite resolving into a pinpoint source. The extra footsteps shadowed us, their rhythm consistently, unnervingly off. My flashlight beam swept across a faded sign, Hydrotherapy Ward B. An arrow indicated left, down a constricted passage flanked by heavy metal doors. Suddenly, the music swelled, achieving a moment of crystalline clarity. It emanated from the corridor's terminus. "Okay, no," Kalen declared firmly. "My threshold is reached. We need to leave." "Just one quick look," I urged. "Could be someone injured, trapped, or something waiting to trap us," Reese countered, his voice tight. "This is wrong, utterly wrong." But I was already advancing down the hallway. The doors stood ajar, revealing tiled chambers like empty mausoleums, fitted with floor drains and rust-weeping tubs, relics of an era when icy submersion passed for therapy. The footsteps behind us had multiplied. It sounded less like an echo, more like a shuffling throng just beyond the light's edge, their tread a discordant chorus intensifying with each door we passed. Abruptly, the music ceased. The ensuing silence magnified the sound of the footsteps, making them deafening. "That is it!" Kalen seized my arm. "We are leaving, now!" A resonant clang echoed from behind us, a door slamming shut. Then another and another, a percussive cascade down the corridor, the heavy metal portals swinging closed sequentially, advancing towards us. We turned and fled. Our boots hammered the concrete as we sprinted back through the oppressive dark. The phantom steps erupted into a thunderous stampede, seemingly bursting from the very walls, chasing us. Doors continued their violent closure, the concussions pursuing us. I risked a backward glance. In the flickering strobes of our lights, movement registered, shadow fragments flitting between doorways, peripheral phantoms always just evading direct sight. The air, now painfully cold, tore ragged in our lungs. We reached the stairs, scrambling upwards 3 steps at a time, nearly tumbling in our frantic haste. Behind us, a final door slammed with reverberating finality like a cannon shot. Then, only the ragged counterpoint of our own desperate breathing filled the void. "What the—" Reese gasped, bent double. "What in the unholy—" Kalen, camera dangling uselessly, was already moving towards the distant promise of the exit. "Out! Now! No arguments!" Yet some morbid compulsion made me turn, look back towards the basement maw. The music had recommenced, louder now, faster, devoid of its earlier hesitation. It spilled up the stairwell like viscous ink, accompanied by the sound of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of feet shuffling across concrete, and voices. Indistinct, distorted susurrations, speaking words just beyond comprehension. "Don't you dare!" Reese clamped a hand on my shoulder. "We are gone." This time, I offered no resistance. We ran through the rapidly darkening superstructure, flashlight beams slashing wildly. Every shadow writhed, every natural echo felt menacingly deliberate. The music pursued us, diminishing with distance but never entirely vanishing. We burst out into the overgrown lot just as the sun bled away behind the skeletal remains of adjacent buildings. I cast one last look at the sanatorium's darkened facade. For an instant, I imagined faces pressed against the grimy basement windows, a gallery of pallid masks observing our flight. Later, examining Kalen's photographs, anomalies emerged. In every frame captured within the basement corridors, translucent blurs marred the image. humanoid smears of motion invisible to our eyes at the time, and in one shot of a hydrotherapy room, lurking indistinctly in a corner, a decrepit upright piano, its keys visibly depressed, though no player was present. 2 weeks later, the police discovered a vagrant's remains in that basement. The coroner's report stated he'd been deceased for months. They found him slumped at the piano, his fingertips abraded down to the bone, allegedly from incessant playing. I no longer explore the forsaken corners of the world. Yet sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, I hear it. That fractured melody seeping through my apartment walls, accompanied by footsteps eternally out of sync with my own, pacing beside me in the darkness. They say Blackwood Sanatorium is slated for demolition next spring. I won't be there to witness its final fall. Some places ought to remain buried, their malignancies sealed beneath concrete and steel. Some music deserves only silence. But in my dreams, the basement corridor persists. The doors slam shut behind me, the cold intensifies, and always, always there is the music. A simple tune played by bone fingers on decaying ivory, while countless feet shuffle through the gloom in perfect, dreadful rhythm. I shouldn't have gone down there. But now, a chilling certainty grows. Perhaps I never truly left. Each day consigns me to the same ritual, a vertical pilgrimage through this building, floor by ascending floor. That is my remit. Hallways unspool before me, doors stand like silent sentinels, the air itself is tested for anomalous scents, the electric constellations confirmed functional. A tedious rhythm, mostly, yet the fifth stratum breaks the monotony. The shift is palpable the instant the lift sighs open upon it. Here, the atmosphere turns leaden. A peculiar, stifling hush descends, raising the fine hairs along my arms. Records decree it tenantless, utterly unoccupied, but whispers of habitation persist. A blade of light slicing beneath the threshold, a disembodied murmur bleeding through plaster, the spectral strains of bygone melodies drifting down the corridor's length. Always, the sensation of being scrutinized, observed, follows my passage. Sometimes I pause, straining to hear, and feel an echo. Something else, attentive in the oppressive stillness. This post became mine roughly a year past. The initial weeks unfolded without incident, prosaic and predictable. Floor after floor yielded the same tasks, refuse chambers inspected, stairwell access secured, corridors confirmed clear of stray belongings. Floors 1 through 4 adhered strictly to normalcy. But the fifth announced its divergence immediately. Its central artery seemed perpetually shadow-laden, somehow dimmer, even when the lamps overhead claimed to be alight. Certain bulbs would sputter, waver erratically. I marked them for maintenance, replaced them myself more than once, yet they defied lasting remedy, indifferent fixtures mocking my efforts. The company ledger, a Spartan spreadsheet, confirms every unit vacant. No leases active, no transient stays, naught. Yet my daily patrols would reveal portals slightly agape, unlatched inexplicably. Impressions, not always my own previous day's boot prints, would mar the settled dust. Fresher tracks, sometimes of a different, smaller gauge. Other times, sounds, muted murmuring from behind sealed wood, abruptly ceasing the moment my proximity registered. The day the anomaly truly asserted itself began with the elevator delivering me to a frantically strobing hallway light. Far down the dim expanse, one door stood cracked open. An astringent chemical odor, sharp and akin to bleach, stung the air, and beneath it, a muffled tune, warped by the static hiss of a weak signal, emanated from what sounded like an archaic radio. A wave of profound disquiet washed through me, cold in my gut. I advanced, slow steps swallowed by the worn carpet, my own breathing suddenly loud and labored in my ears, palms slick with nervous damp. Reaching the threshold, I nudged the door wider. Darkness pooled within, pierced only by the faint, isolated luminescence of a small lamp in a far corner. Instantly, the music died, cut off as if a switch had been decisively thrown. I crossed into the void, thumbed my torch to life, its beam dissecting the emptiness. Barren. No furnishings, no human trace. Closets yawned vacant. The bathroom echoed only my intrusion. Nothing. Only the persistent chemical tang remained, clinging to the air, and perhaps, just perhaps, a fleeting susurrus behind me, its source forever elusive. I conveyed the incident to Mr. Thorne, the building manager. Was I certain? He queried, his tone laced with polite skepticism. Affirmative. The open door, the spectral music, the chemical smell. I recounted it all. He appeared merely bemused, reiterating the floor's long vacancy. Years since anyone lived up there, Elias, he stated, gesturing vaguely towards the tenant list on his screen. A maintenance worker's oversight, perhaps? Forgetting to lock up? I logged it simply as peculiar occurrence and endeavored to proceed. But the feeling only intensified with each subsequent visit. Stepping from the lift became an act freighted with apprehension, my heart beginning its familiar thrumming against my ribs, unsure what tableau awaited. Sometimes the corridor lay dormant, lights blessedly steady. Other times a distant door would again hang unlatched, or light would bleed through the frosted glass panel of an apartment window. Initially, I fought to disregard these signals, concentrating fiercely on the mundane. Waste disposal checks, verifying the stairwell lock, ensuring the exit signs glowed correctly. Yet something inevitably recaptured my focus. An unidentifiable noise, a protest and groan of floorboards under unseen weight, a sudden, localized chill dropping the temperature noticeably. My scalp would constrict, my stomach roil. Involuntarily, my torch beam would probe beneath doors, seeking shadows, the outline of feet. None ever appeared, yet the weight of unseen eyes, the distinct pressure of being regarded, never lifted. One evening, covering for the nocturnal attendant, the entire building sank into profound quietude, most inhabitants slumbering behind darkened windows. Around midnight, ascending to inspect the roof access hatch, a whim directed me to the 5th floor en route down. Curiosity, perhaps morbid, regarding its nocturnal temperament. The lift doors parted onto Stygian gloom. The overheads were utterly extinguished or defunct. My vision swam, struggling to adjust. Stepping forward onto the carpet, a faint electronic droning reached me, the sound of a radio caught precariously between stations. It led me, a moth to a flickering candle, to a unit at the corridor's terminus. The door, this time, was shut fast. I pressed my ear against the cool wood, pulse thundering, the rush of blood loud and surging in my own ears. The knob refused to turn, locked solid. Inside, the unsettling droning persisted. A soft rap with my knuckles silenced it instantly. 10 seconds crawled by, 15, an eternity compressed. I knocked again, a fraction harder. Stillness answered. The realization struck with chilling clarity. I stood alone in the absolute dark before a locked door in a supposedly empty apartment on a deserted floor. A glacial chill traced my spine, accompanied by the distinct prickling impression of presence directly behind me. My hand, gripping the torch, trembled uncontrollably. I whirled, casting the beam in a wide, frantic arc. Emptiness greeted me. Defeated, unnerved, I retreated. In the ensuing weeks, such encounters became disconcertingly commonplace. A newly replaced corridor bulb would be inexplicably lifeless the next day. My inspections of fixtures, of wiring, yielded nothing amiss. Faint abrasions began appearing near certain door frames, shallow gouges suggestive of clumsy lock-picking attempts or perhaps prying fingers. Yet, no official reports of intrusion surfaced, no tenant complaints materialized. The urge to involve the authorities warred constantly with the stark lack of tangible justification. These were minor disturbances, individually easy to discount. No actual harm done, nothing demonstrably pilfered. So, I held back. But the inquisitiveness festered, growing into a quiet obsession. One afternoon, post-lunch, fortified by caffeine and resolution, I decided upon a meticulous inspection of all 6 units composing the 5th floor. Armed with the master key and the self-assigned rationale that investigating unexplained lights and noises constituted a legitimate maintenance issue, I began with apartment 501. Knock, wait, unlock, enter. Dust lay thick, a gray shroud over undisturbed floorboards. Stark walls stared back, vacant closets gaped, empty cabinets offered no secrets. Unit 502 echoed this desolation, and the pattern repeated through 505. By the time I reached 506, the final door, my conviction had waned, yet thoroughness demanded completion. The door to 506 yielded to a simple turn of the knob, unlocked. I entered cautiously. Torch beam preceded me as habit now dictated, despite the functional overhead lights within. This space felt different, palpably recently occupied. The floor showed significantly less grime than its neighbors. A solitary lamp stood plugged in a far corner of the living area, switched off but distinctly, undeniably tepid to the touch. It had been radiating heat not long ago. On the floor nearby lay a neatly folded blanket, and beside it, a half-consumed bottle of water. I lifted the bottle, liquid still swirled and lapped within. A familiar local brand, utterly anonymous. My mouth turned arid, my stomach knotted tight. Someone had been here, unequivocally. The bathroom confirmed it. The tiles were cleaner than expected, bearing fresh, damp footprints smaller than my own sturdy work boots. Impossible to gender, but certainly not mine. The mundane reality of the water bottle, the simple blanket, this concrete evidence tightened my chest with a mixture of vindication and fear. I was not imagining things. This wasn't some phantasm born of a tired mind or an overactive imagination. From then on, 506 became a daily focal point, a locus of my unease. Sometimes I found it locked, sometimes not. The lamp occasionally radiated that telltale residual warmth. The blanket might be folded differently, shifted slightly. Once, I discovered the lamp illuminated, casting a lonely pool of light. The previous water bottle gone, replaced by another different brand. The notion of installing a discreet camera arose, a tempting solution, only to be firmly quashed by Mr. Thorne, citing inviolable privacy protocols. Proof, irrefutable proof, of squatting was required first, he maintained, still clinging stubbornly to the floor's official vacancy, hinting gently, perhaps kindly, at my potential stress or fatigue. I assured him otherwise, my voice tight with a conviction I couldn't convey. Around 2 months into this heightened vigilance, subtle sounds began to manifest closer to home, near my own ground floor office towards the shift's end. Faint footfalls in the deserted hallway outside my door. Each time I rose swiftly to investigate, silence and emptiness greeted me. The night guard swore no one had passed. Lobby surveillance footage showed only my own solitary movements. A chilling, invasive thought surfaced. Was the occupant of 506 now tracking me? Unease became my constant companion on the elevator ascent. Breath quickening, hands unsteady, almost hesitant, as I reached for the 5th floor button. My phone felt heavy and solid in my pocket, a potential lifeline clutched tight. Yet the perpetrator remained spectral, always just beyond perception. Only the lingering wrongness of the hallway persisted. The occasional faint, sharp whiff of bleach, the distant, ghostly crackle of radio static. One evening, while concluding my final rounds, the sharp, percussive report of a door slamming shut on the 5th floor echoed violently down the central stairwell shaft. Adrenaline surged, hot and immediate. I bypassed the slow lift, taking the stairs 2, sometimes 3 at a time, heart battering against my ribs like a trapped bird, sweat trickling down my temples, stinging my eyes. Bursting through the heavy 5th floor access door, I found the corridor plunged into near darkness, save for a single overhead bulb flickering spasmodically, casting epileptic shadows. No sign of movement. I advanced cautiously down the hallway, torch beams slicing nervously left and right. Then, distinct soft footfalls directly behind me. I whirled, torch beams stabbing the air. Nothing. My heart threatened to escape my chest cavity. I fought consciously to regulate my ragged breathing. The steps resumed, seeming to subtly orbit me, their origin frustratingly elusive, everywhere and nowhere at once. For perhaps 30 agonizing seconds I stood rooted, sweeping the light in trembling defensive arcs. Then, as abruptly as they began, the sounds ceased. Silence, thick and absolute, reclaimed the corridor. I moved towards apartment 506, half expecting, half dreading to find the door standing open. It was locked. I rapped my knuckles against the wood. Silence answered. Staring intently at the doorknob, debating whether to use my key, I heard it. A distinct soft click from within, the unmistakable sound of a light switch being flipped off. My mouth went instantly dry. Another knock, firmer this time, demanding attention. More silence. Nervous energy coursed through me like electricity. A knot tightening low in my gut. I produced the master key, slid it smoothly into the lock, turned, and pushed the door inward. Darkness greeted me. My beam scoured the interior, frantic now. The blanket, gone. The lamp remained in its corner, unplugged this time, cold. Bathroom, empty. The small entryway closet, vacant. Driven by a near-absurd, desperate resolution, I even checked under the sink. Nothing. Whoever resided here, whoever haunted this space, possessed an uncanny, disturbing ability to simply dematerialize. Each day since has only reinforced the unsettling conviction. Someone is either deliberately toying with me, playing some unfathomable game, or cohabiting this floor with exceptional, almost supernatural stealth. There's been no overt aggression, no violence, and still no formal complaints from other tenants about disturbances. Yet the internal strain, the quiet non-apprehension, intensifies with every fifth-floor patrol. I began delaying this part of my rounds until the very end of my shift, seeking the perceived safety of daylight hours. But the unsettling aura, the palpable wrongness of the place, persists regardless of the time. Lights waver without cause, doors groan on silent hinges, and spectral music occasionally drifts from indeterminate sources down the hall, always vanishing upon my approach. One afternoon, driven by a need to act, I decided to wait inside apartment 506. I positioned myself on the floor, back braced against the cool plaster wall, torch off, phone clutched tight in my hand like a useless ward. The room hummed faintly with the latent electricity in the walls, the silence broken only by distant building sounds. Minutes crawled by, stretching into an eternity. My limbs grew cramped and stiff, every faint creak from the structure, every distant rumble amplified in the stillness. After perhaps half an hour of this tense vigil, a gentle, almost hesitant tapping sounded at the door. My heart jolted violently. Rising noiselessly, fluidly, I crept towards the entrance, straining to remain utterly silent. Another knock, soft, measured, deliberate. Perspiration slicked my palms. Should I wait? Call out? Confront? I opted for surprise, a sudden reveal. Grasping the knob firmly, I wrenched the door open violently, ready for anything. The hallway stretched before me, utterly, disappointingly empty. A quick, desperate scan, left, right, towards the stairwell access, revealed nothing, no one. A cold sweat prickled the back of my neck. Never had something so minor, so seemingly innocuous, felt so profoundly disconcerting, so personally directed. Following this latest incident, I informed Mr. Thorne, my voice tight with frustration, that my suspicions were now certainties. An unauthorized occupant definitively resided on the 5th floor. He agreed, with palpable reluctance, to accompany me the next morning for a joint inspection. Together, we toured every unit methodically, 506 included. All were demonstrably vacant, dust undisturbed, the air stale and still. Thorne offered me a puzzled, searching glance, tinged perhaps with skepticism, perhaps even pity. "Keep me posted, Elias," was all he said, his tone non-committal as we left the floor. Exasperation and a profound sense of impotence washed over me. My experiences, so vivid and undeniably real to me, remained unprovable, ephemeral. Over time, I've realized my quest has subtly shifted. It's no longer just about finding proof of a squatter. I find myself searching, almost subconsciously, for something, anything, that might explain the pervasive sense of foreboding, the deep, instinctual dread that Floor inspires. No explanation has ever surfaced, yet the dust on that corridor floor continues to register fresh, inexplicable impressions. The corridor light persists in its erratic failures, defying every new bulb I install with defiant regularity. The phantom radio plays its static-laced, melancholic tunes from nowhere I can ever pinpoint, despite exhaustive searches of every conceivable cavity and closet. Now, the ascent to the 5th floor invariably triggers a visceral clenching deep in my gut. My torch becomes a talisman, gripped tight, its weight a small comfort. My movements up there are measured, cautious, my breath held shallow, listening. No longer do I rush through my checks. Each step is deliberate, each pause attentive. I strain my ears for the low hum, the crackle of antique music. I anticipate the sudden slam of a door, the subtle turn of a distant knob. The feeling of being watched is almost constant now, a tangible pressure, a presence felt just beyond the periphery, patiently waiting for my departure. Every attempt to corner this entity, to catch a glimpse, fails utterly. They slip away like smoke. What recourse remains? Without concrete proof, the authorities are unreachable, my claims too flimsy. Without Mr. Thorne's sanction, surveillance remains impossible, a forbidden tool, and abandoning my duties, my livelihood, is not an option. So, the ritual continues. The checks persist, the unnerving presence endures, and I steel myself daily against losing courage, against succumbing to the insidious fear. That floor, designated empty on paper, feels perpetually, intensely occupied. Doors continue to be discovered open. Lights ignite on their own accord. The music plays from unseen, untraceable sources. Each day, I enter that charged space, torn between desperately hoping for normalcy and secretly craving a confrontation, any confrontation that might finally yield answers. Neither ever materializes. Only the quiet, suffocating tension remains, a constant weight pressing down upon me as I complete my rounds. And every day I depart the fifth-floor corridor, ostensibly solitary, yet utterly, unshakably convinced that I am never truly alone up there at all. The first time the porcelain figurine migrated across the mantelpiece, a tremor of disbelief was easily summoned. A trick of the light, perhaps, or settling foundations. By its third inexplicable journey, however, certainty settled cold and hard in my gut. This house was profoundly unwell. What began as a simple kindness, tending my friend's ancestral home during her absence, had curdled into a waking dread. Day by day, the sensation of unseen eyes intensified, a persistent pressure behind my own, until the question wasn't if something was wrong, but whether I'd survived this stewardship. My name is Alara. Rationality has always been my anchor, pragmatism my compass. Ghost stories, entertaining fictions, conjured for thrills, nothing tethered to the solid world I knew. So, when Serafina, my dearest friend, proposed I inhabit her sprawling Victorian while she pursued business abroad for a month, acceptance came swiftly. The house, admittedly venerable and prone to nocturnal groans, possessed a certain faded grandeur. I envisioned tranquil weeks, punctuated by the clack of my keyboard and the quiet turning of pages. The initial days unfolded with deceptive calm. I established a rhythm. Remote work cocooned in the sunlit library, evenings spent charting the labyrinthine corridors, discovering the eccentric strata of heirlooms layered amongst contemporary comforts. Serafina had mentioned its lineage, generations breathing within these walls, evidenced by the curious juxtaposition of antiques and modern design. It was the fourth night when the familiar fabric of reality began to fray. Curled upon a velvet chaise, lost in a novel, an abrupt chill descended, leaching warmth from the air like a physical presence. Simultaneously, a whisper, thin as spider silk, brushed my ear. Perhaps only the ancient house sighing, the wind through ill-fitting sashes. I dismissed it. A shiver traced down my spine, attributed to drafts and an imagination overstimulated by solitude. Then the vase shifted. An intricate ceramic piece perched innocuously on a mahogany side table opposite me. A peripheral flicker registered its movement. A distinct slide, no more than an inch, yet irrefutable. I blinked, vision swimming momentarily, convinced fatigue was playing tricks. Staring directly, it sat immobile, radiating fragile innocence. A nervous laugh escaped me. The old pile was clearly working its atmospheric sorcery. I retreated to bed that night, marginally unsettled, determinedly pushing the incident from my thoughts. Silence reigned the following day, lulling me back towards ease. But as dusk bled through the tall windows, the disquiet returned, insidious and pervasive. Standing at the kitchen sink, hands immersed in soapy water, a distinct thump resonated from the floor above. The sound suggested a heavy book tumbling from a shelf. Heart hammering against my ribs, I ascended the creaking staircase, nerves taut, half expecting a confrontation. Yet the upper level lay steeped in silence, undisturbed. Room by room I searched, finding only dust motes dancing in the fading light. As I pivoted to descend, a flash of movement snagged my attention. The vase, that same delicate porcelain, now resided on a narrow console table in the hallway. I could have sworn it had been downstairs. "Compose yourself, Alara," I murmured, the words feeling hollow. "You're unraveling." But a deeper, colder intuition whispered otherwise. The house felt poised, expectant, holding its breath. Sleep that night was a fractured affair. Each groan of timber, every sigh of the wind became a potential intrusion. I tossed, turned, finally succumbing to a fitful doze near dawn, only to awaken to a tableau of violation. Every single kitchen cabinet door gaped open. Standing paralyzed in the doorway, surveying the silent chaos, a wave of icy fear washed through me. Impossible. I hadn't left them like this. With hands that trembled betrayingly, I began closing them, one by one, flinching at the click of each latch. As the final door swung shut, a fleeting darkness darted across the adjacent wall. I spun, but the space was empty. The shadow vanished as if it had never been. Later that day, I phoned Serafina, carefully modulating my voice to sound casual. Was there anything peculiar about the house I should be aware of? Her laughter crackled down the line. The place was old, she chirped, full of character, drafts, and odd noises. Certainly nothing sinister. I tried to anchor myself to her easy dismissal, but the knot tightening in my stomach refused to yield. The days that followed blurred into a pattern of escalating strangeness. Objects developed a disconcerting habit of repositioning themselves the moment my gaze shifted. Footfalls echoed from empty floors above while I was below, and vice versa. Once, I jolted awake in the dead of night to find every lamp in the house blazing, despite my meticulous ritual of extinguishing them before sleep. Sundown became a threshold I dreaded crossing. Nightfall was when the house shed its daytime skin, truly awakening. Shadows pooled with unnatural depth, seeming to writhe at the edges of vision. More than once, reflections in mirrors or polished surfaces held fleeting figures that dissolved upon a direct look. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into my vigil, I was roused by music. Faint, ethereal, seeming to drift from a great distance, yet unmistakably the strains of an old-world waltz. My heart vaulted into my throat. Compelled, I crept downstairs, drawn towards the living room. The scene that awaited me there remains etched into my memory, a recurring phantom in my dreams. The heavy furniture had been shunted against the walls, clearing a vast space in the room's center. And within that space, things were animated. The vase, the progenitor of my fear, spun languidly in midair. Books drifted past like spectral birds, pages rustling softly. And at the heart of this impossible ballet, two indistinct shadows coalesced, turning and swaying to the ghostly melody. I stood transfixed, mind refusing to process the visual heresy. As I watched, one shadow form pivoted towards me. It possessed no face, no discernible features, yet I felt its attention lock onto mine, an awareness that bypassed sight. Abruptly, the music ceased. Everything, vase, books, shadows, plummeted to the floor with a discordant crash. I fled, scrambling back to my borrowed bedroom, bolting the door, burrowing beneath the covers like a terrified child. Sleep was a forgotten country. I lay rigid until the first gray light of dawn, starting at every settling creak. The following morning, departure felt not just sensible, but essential. Yet some contrary impulse held me fast. Stubbornness, perhaps, or a morbid curiosity, or maybe a deeper, unnamed instinct nudging me towards understanding. I resolved to stay, to decipher the narrative woven into the very fabric of this house. The day was consumed by research, delving into the property's provenance, seeking anchors for the inexplicable. What I unearthed sent a chill deeper than any spectral draft. Constructed in the late 19th century by a prosperous industrialist, the house had been his sanctuary, filled with art and antiquities gathered from across the globe alongside his wife. Their lives were shattered, however, when their only daughter vanished without a trace under circumstances shrouded in mystery. The bereaved couple followed her into silence soon after, and the house cycled through various hands before landing in Seraphina's lineage. Reading about the lost girl, an unshakable conviction formed. She was intrinsically linked to my experiences. Was it her spirit lingering, ensnared within these walls? Were the dancing shadows her grieving parents, forever trapped in their sorrow? That night, propelled by a volatile cocktail of fear and resolve, I decided confrontation was the only path forward. I took a seat in the living room, the very epicenter of the ghostly waltz, and spoke into the charged silence. "I know you are here," my voice, though tremulous, carried. "I am not leaving. I am not afraid. Please, show yourself." Silence stretched, thick and expectant. Then, almost imperceptibly, the air grew colder. The vase, that damnable, persistent vase, slid across the table, inching towards me, and reflected in the grand mirror above the fireplace, a visage began to coalesce. It was the face of a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, etched with sadness, confusion, and an aching loneliness. As I watched, riveted, her translucent lips formed words, soundless yet perfectly clear. "Help me." In that instant, the fear that had held me captive dissolved, replaced by a profound surge of empathy and purpose. This wasn't malice seeking to terrorize, it was a lost soul, adrift and isolated for over a century. The ensuing week became a frantic immersion into the esoteric. I devoured texts on paranormal phenomena, consulted with self-proclaimed mediums, most regarding me with thinly veiled skepticism, and attempted to reconstruct the fragmented puzzle of the girl's fate. The spectral activity persisted, but its character shifted. It felt less menacing, imbued now with a palpable sorrow. Objects still drifted, but gently, almost tentatively. The music, when it returned, was softer, a mournful lullaby, and sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, I'd hear faint sounds akin to a child weeping. On my final night within those walls, I felt prepared. Candles marked a circle on the living room floorboards, the air thick with the purifying smoke of burning sage as I recited the carefully memorized passages. The atmosphere crackled, heavy with an almost electrical potential. Candle flames danced wildly, casting flickering light upon the space before me. And there she materialized. The girl from the mirror stood, shimmering and translucent. A smile touched her lips, radiating pure, unburdened relief. As I watched, her form grew indistinct, fading like mist until she vanished entirely. With her departure, the oppressive weight that had saturated the house for so long lifted, leaving behind only stillness. When Serafina returned, I recounted everything, bracing for disbelief. To my astonishment, she accepted my story without question. It transpired that generations of her family had sensed oddities within the house, though none had experienced phenomena as intense or overt as mine. I moved my belongings out the following day, yet the house, and what transpired within it, had irrevocably altered my internal landscape. I no longer scoff at tales whispered in the dark or dismiss the possibility of realms beyond rational grasp. I understand now that existence contains contours unseen, occupying the liminal spaces between knowledge and fear. And occasionally, when the night is profoundly quiet, I fancy I catch the faintest echo of an old waltz on the breeze, a poignant reminder that not all hauntings are born of malevolence, that sometimes all a spirit craves is acknowledgement, a listening ear, a helping hand. Still, I confess, porcelain vases now evoke an involuntary shudder. These woods, my verdant refuge, a cathedral of silence where my thoughts could unspool, always, until that inauspicious afternoon. The sun bled gold across the canopy, long shadows stretching like skeletal fingers between the trunks, and in that failing light, my known world began to fray at the edges. Deeper than paths dared trespass, where the atmosphere itself seemed steeped in rot and time's dust, I unearthed the altar. One careless caress, a moment's trespass, and I roused a slumbering virulence, a primordial hunger that had festered in darkness, awaiting just such a blunder, just such a fool. Dawn had barely cracked the horizon when I shouldered my pack. Nuts, dried fruit, water, a tattered guide to the local biome clinging to its binding. Autumn's crisp teeth worried my cheeks as boots crunched the familiar confetti of fallen leaves. How many times had my soles pressed this earth? Yet a restless urge, a siren song from the forest's unmapped heart, pulled me onward that day, beyond the comforting weave of known trails. Hours dissolved. The trodden ways surrendered to tangled suggestions of passage, choked by seasons of shed foliage and grasping briars. Here, the timber stood ancient, gnarled limbs clawing at the bruised twilight sky. A peculiar hush descended, thick and watchful, punctuated only by the furtive scuttling of unseen life. A tremor, deep in my gut, hissed, "Retreat." It spoke of perils coiled in the shadows. But that insidious itch, curiosity's venom, urged me deeper still. The afternoon light began to thicken when a discordant gleam snagged my eye. Something manufactured, alien amidst the loam and moss. Compelled, I wrestled through a thorny barricade, the brambles tearing threads from my clothes, leaving stinging kisses on my skin. And then, revelation. It commanded a small, sunken clearing, awash in the day's dying, buttery light. A primal construction, a rough-hewn plinth of stone ringed by leaning, eroded figures like forgotten sentinels. Every surface writhed with carvings, intricate sigils whose sharp edges had been blurred by ages of wind and rain. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I crept closer. The air here was wrong, palpably dense, freighted with an invisible weight that prickled the nape of my neck. Offerings lay strewn at the altar's base, desiccated blooms, molted feathers, and, unsettlingly, the delicate, bleached architecture of tiny skeletons. Gods above, I breathed, sinking to my haunches for a better look. In the fading illumination, the glyphs etched into the stone seemed to pulse with a subtle internal light, undulating faintly. Hallucination? I blinked, scrubbed my eyes, but the unsettling motion persisted. Hypnotic. It drew me closer, a moth to a flame, even as a cold dread coiled low in my belly. Thought abandoned me. My fingers, acting of their own volition, stretched forward, tracing the serpentine curves of a single complex sigil. The instant flesh met lithic cold, a violent current ripped through my nervous system, a blinding internal electrocution that seized every muscle. I snatched my hand back with a strangled gasp, staggering clear of the altar. Silence, utter stillness gripped the clearing, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own blood. Then, insidiously, the world tilted. A pressure began to build, an atmospheric vice tightening around me. Cold descended like a shroud, stealing the warmth, my exhalations pluming white in the sudden frost. The gentle amber light winked out, replaced by a spectral gloaming that seemed to bleed directly from the stones of the altar. And beneath it all, I felt it, an awareness unfurling, vast, aeons old, steeped in a malice so profound my sanity threatened to buckle. It was as if the very soil, the roots, the ancient trees had opened a single, baleful eye. Raw instinct screamed, "Flee!" I pivoted, lunging for the perceived edge of the clearing, only to collide brutally with nothing. An unseen, unyielding wall threw me backward onto the damp earth, breath knocked clean from my lungs. Panic, sharp-fanged, tore at my throat. Scrabbling upright, eyes wild, I searched for egress, but the clearing had warped. The surrounding trees now soared to impossible heights, their upper branches twisting together, weaving a suffocating canopy, a living prison. Shadows pooled and deepened, and within them, motion, fluid, indescribable forms jittering at the periphery of sight, dissolving when faced directly. A deep, serrated growl rolled through the space, sourceless yet omnipresent. I spun, finding only the silent, brooding altar. "Who's there?" The words were a thin tremor in the oppressive air. Another growl, this time seeming to scrape the air inches behind my ear. A phantom sensation, impossibly hot breath against my neck. I whirled. Empty space mocked me. My heart threatened to batter its way free of my ribs. retreating step by agonizing step, eyes scanning the burgeoning dark. Please, the thought screamed silently. A mistake. I didn't mean it. Let me leave. A laugh answered, colder than the sudden frost, brittle with ancient cruelty. Then, the voice. Not sound, but an intrusion, grinding into my consciousness like tectonic plates shifting. Too late, small trespasser. The mental resonance was agonizing. You have stirred the deep slumber. The debt is now yours to settle. The darkness congealed. Shapes bled from the gloom, coalescing into horrors that defied geometry and reason. Things of too many limbs or none at all. Eyes like embers burning with cold, alien hunger. Talons of shadow scraped the air, reaching. A raw shriek ripped from my throat. Pure animal terror. I bolted, directionless, propelled only by the need to put distance between myself and the closing abominations. But the clearing played tricks with space. No matter how frantically I ran, the altar remained stubbornly equidistant, a fixed point in a swirling nightmare. Time became elastic, meaningless. My lungs were furnaces, legs screaming protest, threatening collapse. Yet I ran, knowing stasis meant consumption. Then, just as oblivion beckoned, a flicker, a tear in the oppressive weave of trees, a glimpse of mundane woodland beyond. Hope, fierce and desperate, ignited a final surge. I hurled myself toward that fragile promise. For an eternal second, failure seemed certain. The scrape of something sharp along my back, the fetid warmth of pursuit on my neck. And then I burst through, crashing, tumbling down a slope slick with fallen leaves. The impact stole my breath, stars exploding behind my eyelids. I lay sprawled, gulping air, too terrified to move, listening. Gradually, the familiar symphony of the woods filtered back, wind sighing through branches, the far-off cry of a hawk, ordinary sounds. Tentatively, I cracked open my eyes. I was nestled at the base of a gentle incline, surrounded by unassuming trees bathed in the soft, painterly hues of sunset. No clearing, no altar, no impossible geometry of terror, just the woods. Painfully, stiffly, I hauled myself upright. My clothes were shredded, skin mapped with scrapes and blooming bruises. Alive, though. Free. Or so the thought fluttered, fragile as a butterfly's wing. Then a cold dread, sharp as ice, pierced the relief. Because through a gap in the familiar trees, catching the last rays of sun, glinted something utterly wrong. Stone, weathered totems, a primitive altar. My veins turned to slush. The awful certainty crashed down. Escape was an illusion. The clearing, the malevolence I'd unleashed, hadn't been left behind. It was here. It was everywhere. Waiting. Watching. And its patience was infinite. Sheer terror lent wings to my battered body. I ran, heedless of exhaustion, stumbling through the twilight woods until the blessed sight of my vehicle emerged from the gloom, miles from where I thought I'd left the path. Keys fumbled, engine roared, tires spat gravel. Driving away, hands slick with sweat, vibrating against the wheel, I felt eyes on my back, an unseen weight pressing close in the rearview mirror. Days bled into weeks. I spun elaborate webs of self-deception, fatigue, dehydration, awakened nightmare born of isolation, plausible deniability. But the lies frayed thin in the quiet hours when dusk crept into corners and silence deepened. In those moments, the awareness returned, that vast, cold sentience, observing me from just beyond the thinnest veil of perception. There is no true escape. I comprehend this now. It persists, patient as stone, eternal as decay, waiting for a lapse, a moment of weakness when the membrane between worlds weakens. And it will come. A single, foolish touch upon secrets not intended for human senses. A curiosity that signed my doom. The altar may have retreated into the forest shadows, but the virulence it holds is awake now. It breathes, it waits, and its hunger will inevitably find me once more. A tremor still skates down my spine whenever memory summons the night the world tilted on its axis. Skepticism is my default setting, fear a seldom visited country, yet this edifice of weary brick possesses an insidious talent for burrowing beneath the skin. Its quietude is profound, most days bordering on the unnerving, a sepulchral hush that initially felt like sanctuary for a soul craving solitude. But then came the aberrations next door, the subtle disturbances in the fabric of silence, and ignorance became an unaffordable luxury. 6 months I've called this place home, lured by modest rent and adequate square footage. The walls stand thick, ceilings vault high, and the corridor luminaires suffer fits of epileptic flickering. Neighbors are phantoms glimpsed in transit, laden with groceries or hustling toward unseen obligations, their doors sealed tight, voices murmured behind wood and plaster, an enclave of mutual disregard, precisely what I'd sought. The apartment flanking mine, to the right as you face the hallway's end, presents a door identical to its brethren, off-white enamel, scarred near the base with chips like old wounds. A peephole punctuates its surface, a blind eye perpetually obscured from within. My own furtive attempts to penetrate its gaze yielded only impenetrable darkness. I conjured explanations, nocturnal employment perhaps. No soul ever witnessed entering or departing. Their schedule, I reasoned, must be woven into the deepest hours. Yet, niggling inconsistencies began to fray this logic. Sometimes, swallowed by the night's deepest ink, a frail luminescence would bleed through a sliver in the curtains. This was the first discordant note, for the dwelling radiated vacancy. Blinds were habitually clamped shut, save for that marginal gap betraying a filament of light. Someone resided there, surely, I insisted to myself, some hermit shunning daylight, but the silence remained absolute, defying even this theory. No footfalls, no murmurs, no electronic hum. Just that transient glow, extinguished moments after appearing. One night, with the clock hands nearing 2, music materialized, soft, languid jazz seeping through the shared wall like smoke. I sat reading in my living room when the phantom melody drifted across. It persisted for perhaps 20 seconds, a fleeting auditory mirage before dissolving back into the quiet. Pressing my ear to the plaster, I strained for any subsequent sound, but the stillness had reclaimed its territory. The following day, pausing in the hallway, I listened intently at their threshold. Nothing. The impulse to knock warred with a potent unease. Intrusion felt like trespass. I retreated. Several nights later, the music returned, this time near midnight. My bedroom shares a partition with what I presume is their main living space. The jazz notes were crisper now, slightly amplified, yet still restrained. It lingered longer than before. Drawn to my own window, I scanned the street below for an external source. Emptiness. Then, shifting my gaze across the narrow chasm to my neighbor's window, I saw the curtains slightly agape. A dim, warm illumination pulsed within. I remained motionless, searching for movement. And then I saw him. Tall, clad in somber hues, dark trousers, a long-sleeved shirt, he stood with his back to the glass, oriented toward what appeared to be a mirror perched on a dresser or table against the far wall. A mundane act, I assumed, self-appraisal, until I registered the detail that tightened a cold fist in my stomach. His reflection refused to mimic him. The man's shoulders rose, the intake of a deep breath, yet the shoulders of his doppelganger in the glass remained stubbornly inert. His right hand ascended towards his face, a gesture to wipe sweat, perhaps, or rub his jaw, but the reflection's hand stayed limply at its side. A sudden, visceral chill permeated my limbs. Disbelief warred with observation. I blinked repeatedly, convinced my eyes were deceiving me. A trick of the light? A second figure obscured? But no, the reflection was his perfect twin. Identical height, build, attire, except for its chilling autonomy. And then its head turned. I froze, rooted to the spot. The reflection's face pivoted, gazing directly out the window. It felt as though its eyes locked onto mine, though the man himself hadn't shifted his posture an inch. My heart commenced a frantic drumming against my ribs. A dull ache blossomed low in my belly. I stood utterly still, paralyzed by the fear of being seen, truly seen. The reflection's stare felt like a physical probe. A primal urge to wave, to shout, died in my constricted throat. The man before the mirror remained oblivious, facing inward, while his mirrored phantom held me captive in its outward gaze. Then, the reflection's mouth stretched, contorting into something that might have been a smile, or the prelude to speech. A soft creak echoed from the other side of the wall. Simultaneously, the light within the room winked out. The music ceased, plunging everything into abrupt silence and darkness. I stood staring into that black rectangle of window, breath coming in ragged gasps, a sheen of sweat cooling on my forehead. My hands trembled faintly. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the floor seeming distant and unstable. For a long while, I just stared downwards, attempting to stitch together a rational tapestry from threads of impossibility. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Morning found me seeking out the building manager, Mr. Martell, a man whose polite demeanor usually softened his slightly worn edges. I relayed the strange occurrences in the adjacent unit. He regarded me with frank confusion, stating unequivocally that the apartment had stood vacant for years. Had a new tenant slipped his notice? Could someone possess an illicit key? He remained adamant. Empty. He even produced records corroborating the last tenancy, concluded 5, perhaps 6 years prior. The owner had listed it for sale, unsuccessfully. Mr. Martell offered to accompany me to inspect the door. Upstairs, his knock elicited only silence. He inserted the master key, but the lock resisted, jamming part way. Unwilling to force entry without the owner's explicit consent, he apologized, promising further investigation. I returned to my apartment, adrift in a sea of frustration and disquiet. The lights, the music, the impossible figure at the mirror, these were not figments. That night, I consciously tried to banish the unease. Television, a microwaved meal, bed around 11, but sleep remained elusive. Every creak in the corridor sent jolts through my system, my senses strained, hyper-alert for any whisper from next door. Around midnight, a soft thump resonated against the shared wall. Subtle, intimate, the sound of a palm or shoulder pressing against the plaster. I slid out of bed, switched on a dim lamp, and positioned myself near the wall, ear pressed tight. A faint scratching emerged, the whisper of fabric against drywall. Then, undeniably, the jazz melody resurfaced, barely audible. My chest constricted. Stepping back, I fumbled for my phone, contemplating a late call to Martell, yet deterred by the hour and a creeping sense of absurdity. The music faded within moments. Compelled, I approached my window once more. No light emanated from the neighboring apartment. Utter blackness reigned. I stared at the inert curtain, pulse throbbing in my ears. Then, a single bar of light flickered into existence. A lamp, perhaps, or an overhead fixture. Impossible to determine its source. It cast a weak, jaundiced glow. The curtain remained mostly drawn, but the gap persisted. Edging closer, keeping my own form shielded by shadow, I glimpsed him again. The man occupied the same space near the phantom mirror. This time, only his upper torso and shoulders were visible. His right arm moved with deliberate slowness, as if retrieving something from the unseen table. His face remained obscured. A second later, the reflection executed a completely disparate motion, leaning forward, seeming to peer intently into the glass itself. My mouth turned to dust. Tingling awareness prickled my extremities. The same horrifying desynchronization. Then the reflection's head swiveled toward the window, pausing, scanning. I ducked instinctively, heart hammering, breath catching. Terror tightened its grip. Risking a fractional peek over the sill, I saw the reflection's head still oriented my way, while the man's physical form appeared fixed on the mirror. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Suddenly, the reflection raised an arm, index finger extending, pointing directly toward my hiding place. My body locked. A profound weakness invaded my legs, sending me stumbling backward, colliding with the stack of magazines near my desk. Pain flared as my elbow struck the table's corner. A sharp hiss escaped my lips. When I dared to look again, the window next door was dark. The remainder of the night unfolded on my couch, the television murmuring on low volume, a futile bulwark against the silence. Periodic glances toward the window revealed nothing, yet the expectation of seeing that glow, that figure, remained a palpable tension. Morning light brought Mr. Martell into the hallway, occupied with replacing a burnt-out bulb. I cornered him, recounting the previous night's music, the silhouette, the pointing reflection. Describing the mismatch felt inherently ludicrous, even as the words left my mouth. Martell's expression shifted from confusion to a subtle concern. He reiterated his pending call with the owner. Permission granted, he would open the unit. Could I be present? A shrug. As long as I disturbed nothing. For the ensuing days, I deliberately averted my gaze from that apartment. The music whispered once more, deep in the night, but I chained myself away from the window. Answers were imminent, I told myself. Martell would unlock the door, revealing prosaic emptiness, faulty wiring, perhaps the remnants of a squatter's brief stay, or forgotten speakers rigged to a timer. I clung desperately to the shores of normalcy. Finally, a Tuesday morning brought Martel's knock. Keys jangled in his hand. The owner had consented. We stood before the door. He inserted the key. This time, the mechanism yielded. The door swung inward an inch, then stopped, obstructed. Martel applied pressure. With a scraping protest, the door lurched open, revealing a small barricade of aged cardboard boxes. Dust motes danced in the disturbed air, triggering a sneeze. Inside, the apartment exhaled neglect. Stale air hung heavy. The hardwood floors bore scars and fissures. We navigated the living room, scanning for any sign of recent habitation. Nothing. No furniture, save a solitary, dust-laden table relegated to a corner. No seating, no bed in the adjacent room, no crockery in the kitchen cupboards. Water stains mapped cryptic geographies on the walls. Martel wrestled the blinds open, admitting weak daylight. My gaze swept the room, hunting for a mirror. None existed. A knot tightened in my gut. The space was precisely as Martel had described. Vacant, not a shred of evidence, no linens, no clothes, no electronics, suggested occupancy. The sole anomaly was a faint, lingering scent near one corner, reminiscent of old, faded cologne. I walked to the window that mirrored my own bedroom view. The curtain hung askew, detached partially from its rod, its heavy fabric coated in grime. I pulled it fully aside. The alignment was perfect, offering a direct line of sight into my room. I pictured myself standing there, peering inward. My eyes sought the corner where the tall man had stood. Empty space greeted me. No mirror, no table, only faint, dusty footprints. Hours, perhaps, or echoes from years past. Impossible to discern. Martel offered a shrug, mumbled something about the tricks old buildings play on the eyes, and departed. I lingered, exploring the other rooms, a frantic scavenger seeking any crumb of explanation for the lights, the music, the figure, the reflection. I found nothing. Returning to my own apartment, I felt hollowed out, consumed by an unnerving exhaustion. Routine felt alien. Echoes of that spectral jazz tune haunted the periphery of my hearing. What was I to believe? Relief warred with a deeper, more profound disturbance. If the apartment was truly empty, then what had I witnessed? That night, steeling myself, I approached my window around 11. The apartment opposite remained dark. The curtain, left open after our inspection, revealed only the shadowed interior. A fragile calm began to settle. Perhaps the intrusion, the light, had broken the spell. As I started to turn away, a light flickered on in that deserted living room, unmistakably. No lamp, no fixture existed there. We had confirmed it, yet a pallid glow bloomed, weak as a dying bulb or a guttering candle. My heart surged. I forced myself to remain, to watch. The air in my room felt suddenly glacial against my skin. My neck grew rigid. A tall silhouette materialized, eclipsing part of the feeble light. The exact outline, broad shoulders, long limbs. It stood near the corner, the very spot confirmed empty mere hours before. My breath lodged in my throat. I waited, suspended. A heartbeat later, the figure turned slowly, just enough to present its profile. Details remained elusive, lost in shadow, but the shape was distinct. It was undeniably looking my way. Though I couldn't discern eyes, I felt the weight of its gaze. The fine hairs on my arms prickled upright. That debilitating weakness returned to my legs. My hand instinctively sought my phone, not to call, but merely to hold, an anchor in the tide of impossibility. The figure stepped sideways, a slow drift toward the window. Not closer, I realized, but adjacent. The music began again, faint, thin, imbued with the scratchy texture of an ancient phonograph. My heart hammered violently. I wanted to wrench my eyes away, to flee, but remained transfixed. The figure deliberately raised an arm, finger extended, pointing directly at me. A silent, undeniable accusation. He saw me. I recoiled, stumbling backward. My phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering onto the floor. When I looked up, blinking back tears of sheer terror, the adjacent window was black once more. The light, the silhouette, extinguished. The music vanished. Only silence remained. I stood there, pulse throbbing in my temples, staring at that void for what felt like an eternity but could only have been moments. How? After finding nothing? Now, recounting this, I possess no answers, only the chilling certainty of my experience. Mr. Martell maintains the official narrative. Vacancy. No explanations have been offered, none sought beyond his initial dismissal. I haven't ventured back inside. I skirt that section of the hallway after dark. Moving is a tempting fantasy, constrained by finances. I oscillate between desperate hope for a mundane solution overlooked and the chilling acceptance of the impossible. I cannot erase the memory of that reflection turning, staring, nor the final, pointing silhouette. It defied reality, yet I witnessed it. Sleep is a fraught territory now, haunted by phantom jazz notes, by the image of pale light leaking through unseen curtains. Sometimes I awaken slick with sweat, utterly convinced that something stands just beyond the plaster, listening. But courage, when mustered, reveals only darkness, and sometimes that darkness feels sentient, watchful. I no longer know the precise boundary between perception and reality, but I know what I saw, what I continue to hear, regardless of disbelief. I cannot deny it. Something resides in that apartment, and its presence refuses to be ignored. The most terrifying part? I don't believe I can ignore it any longer. Each night is a vigil, listening for the next sound, dreading the next flicker of light, trapped in an unwinnable war of attrition with the unknown. And I have no strategy for escape, no notion of how to silence the music or extinguish the light for good. Dusk was settling like fine ash when I reached the place. The cabin somehow diminished beneath the vast, bruised sky, less substantial than memory had painted it. A curt figure, the caretaker, materialized briefly, pressing a solitary key on a corroded ring into my palm. His words were clipped. He rarely visited, call if trouble arose, before he vanished back down the track in a plume of dust. I lingered on the low, warped porch, gazing out at the morass that began just yards away. Ink-dark water, unnervingly placid save for a slick membrane reflecting the sky's final, feverish orange. The air hung thick with the perfume of decay, wet leaves composting into mold. A scent I initially welcomed, the smell of solitude, ideal for the work I'd come to do. Damp air and quiet nights, I'd reasoned, were manageable prices for focus. My single duffel and a carton of provisions felt heavier crossing the threshold. Inside, confinement. A narrow cot, a diminutive table flanked by 2 chairs, a short counter serving as the kitchen. Brownish tide marks stained the lower walls, testament to the swamp's periodic incursions. A pervasive clamminess clung to everything. The very wood seemed to weep moisture. In one corner squatted a squat gas stove, its enamel chipped, clearly weathered by use. Cupboards yielded a meager collection. Mismatched utensils, a cup, a couple of plates. Electricity hummed reluctantly. The lone ceiling bulb pulsed with an unsteady light. Through the thin walls, the swamp breathed its chorus. Frogs offered their guttural croaks. Something unseen slithered and hissed amongst the reeds. A tremor ran through me, dismissed as the static of arrival, of being utterly alone. My laptop found its place on the small table. Connection attempts proved futile. No signal bars bloomed. My phone, too, struggled, grasping feebly for service before conceding defeat. A minor inconvenience, I told myself. Distraction was the enemy of progress. Yet the isolation deepened, severing this frail outpost from the world beyond. When the sun finally submerged, the swamp outside became a void. Stepping back onto the porch, I found the moon hoisted high, illuminating a dense fog unfurling across the water like spectral linen. A splash echoed from the far side, swallowed by the mist. Then I saw them. Faint glimmers within the fog like distant bobbing lanterns near the water's surface. I strained my eyes. Larger than fireflies, these lights swayed with an eerie deliberation, sometimes occluded by the shifting vapor, only to reappear. My pulse quickened. I watched, breathless, for a full minute, anticipating their approach. They remained distant, weaving a slow, silent pattern. Curiosity pulled me towards the water's edge. The ground beneath my boots yielded, spongy, like treading on sodden velvet. Reaching the bank intensified the smell. Heavier now, acidic, rotten vegetation stewing in stagnant depths. Fog clung tenaciously to the reeds, forcing me to lean in to pierce the gloom. 50 yards out, perhaps, the lights flickered. I listened intently for voices, hearing only the muffled thrum of frogs, the sigh of wind through cattails. A subtle shift beneath my feet, a squelch suggesting water flowing just under a thin crust of mud, sent me recoiling. My arms tensed, heart thudding against my ribs. The raw solitude of this place pressed in. The lights persisted, indifferent. Retreat seemed prudent. Back inside, focus fractured. The strange lights haunted the periphery of my thoughts. I hammered out a few sentences, frustration mounting, then snapped the laptop shut. The buzzing overhead bulb grated. I flicked it off, plunging the room into near darkness. From a corner cabinet, I unearthed an old oil lamp. Its steady flame cast a warmer, dimmer glow, softening the cabin's harsh lines. After a time, a new sound surfaced. Faint, persistent murmuring from outside, like voices filtered through water. Holding my breath, I strained to decipher it. Silence fell abruptly. I placed the lamp on the table, stood utterly still, waiting. The susurrus resumed, intimate yet indistinct, like two people whispering just beneath the surface. A cold wave rolled through me, raising goose flesh. I secured the door, noting with unease its flimsy construction. Thin wood, a simple lock. Dragging the small table against it offered scant reassurance, a token barrier. Sleep offered little refuge that first night. The oil lamp remained lit, turned low, painting shifting shadows on the walls. Closing my eyes conjured images. The fog shrouded lights, indistinct shapes moving in the reeds. Eventually, oblivion must have claimed me, for I awoke to profound silence. The lamp had guttered out, leaving a faint trace of smoke. My back protested the ancient mattress. Gray dawn seeped through the single window above the cot, illuminating damp patches on the ceiling, rivulets of old water stains tracing paths down the walls. Shoving the blanket aside, I rose, a dull ache pulsing behind my eyes. Daylight demanded exploration, a charting of this sodden territory. The morning air was a tangible presence, thick, humid, carrying that sour tang on the breeze. The vegetation ringing the swamp was taller, wilder than it had appeared. Gnarled trees, half drowned, thrust twisted limbs from the water. Mud near the edge clutched at my boots, releasing them with a greedy sucking sound. Beside the cabin, a small clearing sloped towards the mire, the ground firmer here. Green algae scummed the water, broken by patches of black, reflective liquid. I scanned for signs of passage, human or animal. A few frogs sunned themselves on a log. A snake poured itself into the undergrowth at my approach. No footprints, no discarded wrappers, only stillness, yet underscored by teeming hidden life. Insects droning, unseen ripples betraying movement beneath the surface. Most of the day dissolved in futile attempts at writing. Lunch was a solitary affair of tinned goods consumed at the little table. Claustrophobia tightened its grip. The walls, the low ceiling, seemed to press inwards, the swamp's breath seeping through invisible cracks. Small gurgles emanated from outside as if the mire itself were sighing. Mid-afternoon, seeking relief, I threw open the windows. The breeze offered no respite, merely thicker, wetter air, but I left them ajar, hoping vainly to dispel the cabin's stale odor. An uneasy churning began in my gut, born of tension and the pervasive smell. The memory of those lights refused to fade. Toward evening, I ventured out again. Fog was already gathering, tendrils snaking across the water's surface. My boots sank into the yielding earth. I listened, attuned to any discordance in the familiar symphony of frogs and insects. Then, a faint scraping, reeds brushing against something solid. I moved cautiously along the water's edge, trying to muffle my steps. My heart beat a steady, heavy rhythm. My palms grew damp. The sky deepened to an imperial purple. As the moon ascended, the fog thickened, coalescing into a soft gray wall. And there they were again. 3 distinct glows this time, orbiting slowly, closer together now, describing some inscrutable pattern in the same distant sector of the swamp. The urge to wade in, to confront the mystery, warred with a visceral revulsion. That dark water felt treacherous, its depth unknown. I remained rooted to the shore, watching. Suddenly, the whispering returned, softer now, muffled by the encroaching fog. My head felt strangely light. My mouth turned to dust. Dropping into a crouch behind a screen of tall grass, I scanned the shrouded vista. No silhouettes emerged, only reeds and the drifting vapor. The whispering persisted for mere seconds, then ceased. I straightened, wiped sweat from my brow, and beat a hasty retreat to the cabin. Inside, I threw the bolt and switched on the electric light. Its erratic flickering amplified my unease. Retrieving my flashlight, I checked its beam. Strong and steady. It became my companion on the table. I sat, forcing calm into my ragged breathing, debating a call to the caretaker. What could I articulate? Strange lights, odd sounds, swamp gas, he'd likely say, or nocturnal creatures. I was committed to this place for now, and the need for quietude remained. Logic insisted it was nerves frayed by isolation. My gut screamed otherwise. That night, the whispering intensified. It began near midnight, rising and falling like a tide. Words seemed to hover at the edge of comprehension, distorted, as if spoken through layers of wet earth. My hands trembled. I sat rigid on the cot, flashlight aimed squarely at the door, chest tight with apprehension. Shadows danced beyond the window pane. Intermittently, a soft tapping sounded against the cabin's flank, like fingernails drawn across weathered wood. My mind raced, envisioning scenarios. Fleeing now into the dark, down that narrow, rutted track, felt more perilous than staying. Morning, I promised myself. Wait for morning. At some point, exhaustion must have dragged me under again. I awoke drenched in sweat, dawn painting the window gray. The whispering had ceased. My jaw ached from clenching. Tension knotted my shoulders and back. I forced down water from the tap, splashed my face in the small basin. My reflection in the tarnished mirror was a stranger. Haggard, dark circles blooming beneath weary eyes. After a quick, tasteless breakfast, I stepped outside. The air was oppressively thick, the smell intensified, laced with something acrid, sulfuric. I decided to trace the swamp's perimeter in the opposite direction, seeking a source, an explanation. The undergrowth resisted, dense reeds and thorny shrubs clawing at my clothes. My boots plunged into hidden pockets of mud. Sweat plastered my shirt to my back. Insects formed a whining halo around my head. Small creatures rustled away at my clumsy approach. No other dwellings, no paths worn by human feet, just the sprawling morass, patches of dark water interspersed with impenetrable thickets. Leaning trees displayed skeletal, half-exposed roots. Decay was the dominant motif. An hour yielded nothing. Frustration gnawed at me. No hidden boat, no concealed trail offered itself up. Returning to the cabin, I tried again to write. Concentration remained elusive. Every creak of the aging structure, every anomalous sound from the swamp jolted me upright, listening, waiting. The knot in my stomach tightened, a constant companion. That evening, the fog descended earlier, more aggressively. It swallowed the water, crept onto the banks, enveloped the cabin in its damp embrace. Just before full darkness claimed the sky, I stepped out, flashlight carving a tunnel through the mist. Visibility shrank to 10 feet. Beyond that, an impenetrable wall of gray. A distinct splash nearby. I swung the beam, only concentric ripples disturbing the surface. My heart hammered. My mouth was parched. Turning back towards the cabin, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Behind the reeds, a tall, stooped shape. It dissolved the instant the light touched it. I retreated, flashlight beam sweeping the spot where the figure had seemed to stand. Silence descended again. Absolute. I scrambled inside. The door bolted. I wedged a chair beneath the knob, acknowledging the gesture's futility even as I performed it. My hands shook so violently I fumbled the flashlight. Extinguishing the electric bulb, I lit the oil lamp once more. Outside, the darkness felt absolute. The fog pressing against the glass like a physical weight. Condensation streaked the panes, transforming the interior into a humid cavern. Around 9, the whispering began anew, louder than ever before. It sounded like a chorus now, multiple voices interwoven, speaking simultaneously, the words frustratingly indistinct. I fought to ignore it, staring intently at my laptop screen, but the sound seeped past my defenses, coiling in my mind. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. Sweat trickled down my temples. Near midnight, a solid thud struck the cabin wall. I leaped up, sending the chair skittering. My heart felt ready to burst. The whispering surged, seemingly right outside the door, urgent, insistent. Grabbing the flashlight, I crept to the entrance, pressed my ear to the thin wood. I heard a sound like dripping water, the soft shuffle of movement in mud. Panic flared. Should I shout? Warn them off? Fear of provoking something worse held me silent. My mouth felt abrasive, swallowing impossible. How long I stood there, paralyzed, I couldn't say. 10 minutes? 30? Gradually, the sounds ebbed. The whispering faded, leaving only the familiar drone of insects. But the tension remained, a coiled spring inside me. Flashlight clutched tight. I kept vigil until the first fragile light of dawn filtered through the window. My body screamed exhaustion, muscles aching as if from a prolonged struggle. My hands were stiff, cramped around the flashlight cylinder. My neck throbbed. The instant sufficient light permitted, I moved. Laptop, clothes, stuffed haphazardly into the duffel, a hastily scribbled note for the caretaker left on the table. An early departure, unavoidable. The deposit was irrelevant. Escape was paramount. My stomach churned, my pulse still raced. On the porch, the swamp appeared deceptively serene, gray and calm in the nascent light. The fog lingered, a low-slung blanket over the water. A distant splash registered, but it no longer held power over me. I strode towards my car, parked a little way off. The ground felt treacherous, sucking at my boots. Glancing back repeatedly, I half expected some shadowed form to emerge from the reeds. Inside the car, the engine turning over was the sweetest sound. Pulling away from the cabin, a palpable weight lifted. The dirt track, slick with mud, demanded careful navigation. In the rearview mirror, the swamp receded, the cabin's roof briefly visible through the skeletal trees, then gone. My hands still trembled on the steering wheel, but I drove, pushing onward until the blessed asphalt of the main highway appeared. At the first gas station, I pulled over, killed the engine, and drew a long, shuddering breath. My shirt clung damply. My eyes felt gritty with fatigue. Catching my reflection in the station window, I saw the toll. Exhaustion etched deep. The whispers echoed in my memory. The phantom lights shimmered behind my eyes. The tapping resonated against phantom walls. Even miles away, a residue of pressure remained in my chest, a psychic stain. But I was out. Explanations felt superfluous. Freedom from that place was enough. Back in the car, merging onto the highway, the increase in speed felt like absolution. My only objective, distance, find lodging far from any swamp, any fog that concealed dancing lights, any whispers that rose from mud and decay. I drove, watching the odometer click away the miles, resolutely refusing to look back.